Hi everyone, this is our last video for Unit 2, 1607 to 1754. In this video, we're going to be looking at the development of colonial society and culture. So as you can see from our list of Unit 2 topics, this is going to be our topic 2.7, colonial society and culture. And you recall the topics 2.2 to 2.6 were covered in previous videos. So we're going to start by looking at American culture and how it developed and changed over time. And there are a couple really big contributing factors that are really going to help shift and influence American culture, the development of an American identity in the 18th century. So, colonial society in the late 17th and early 18th century is going to see a really, really large population increase. We're going to start to see the arrival of a great deal of Scotch, Irish, Germans, and English settlers. And on top of that, not only are there new arrivals, but people are simply living longer. You may recall from an earlier video that I mentioned, especially in areas like, for example, the Chesapeake Bay area, Tidewater regions, people died pretty quickly of things like malaria and dysentery and typhoid. Well, increasingly, we're seeing these lowered mortality rates as towns and cities become more established, as there's better access to medical care, support, nutrition. And so we are going to see, to a certain extent, a lowered mortality rate. So this means our population will increase considerably for this colonial regions. This also means that our areas are increasingly ethnically diverse. They have a number of different European ethnicities, many different religions. So we see some religious pluralism, and we're also seeing increased intellectual exchange. Now, despite this ethnic diversity, some process we do see in the 18th century is a gradual Anglicization over time. Political communities are increasingly really based on these English models. Many of them are modeled after the representative bodies in Parliament, without the nobility, of course. And the early documents that we'll see even later with the early American Republic are going to be based on, for example, the English Bill of Rights and many rights that these colonists felt they had as English citizens. We're also going to see further Anglicization thanks to intercolonial and transatlantic commercial ties. These more tight ties I mentioned in a previous video, the passage of the navigation laws. And even though they were often laxly enforced, it did help to tie the colonies pretty tightly to commerce with England. And this is going to increase the Anglicization of colonial society. Additionally, we're going to see the development of a transatlantic print culture. More and more printing presses come to be in operation in the 18th century. On the eve of revolution, there's about 40 papers in colonial society that are printed, most of them a single large broadsheet. So transatlantic print culture is definitely going to help spread and foster the spread of Enlightenment ideas, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. It's also going to encourage public discussion, open public discussion and debate. Many colonists published opinion pieces in these papers or sermons, and it's going to encourage a diversity of ideas. Now, interestingly enough, an early case, the John Zanger case, John Zanger wrote for a newspaper absolutely lampooning one of the colonial governors, and he was sued for libel. And his argument was that what he said was true, so it couldn't be libel. Now, the judges were not inclined to believe this, but the jury, other colonists, were very moved by this argument. Him saying, "Hey, this is true. Just because they happen to be a royal official doesn't make it untrue, doesn't make it libel." And he won. The jury voted with him, and ultimately, this is kind of a demonstration that, hey, true stories about officials should not be considered libel. So really, we're going to start to see this early print culture and the first kind of tolling of freedom of the press that will emerge later in the American Republic. On top of this, another thing that's changing American culture is going to be the spread of Protestant evangelicalism in the Great Awakening. And again, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Let's start by talking a little bit about the Enlightenment. Now, you probably recall talking about the Enlightenment if you had world history last year, so you might already have a little bit of understanding of this. But the Enlightenment was an 18th century movement that really began in France, but was also fostered in Britain as well and other European countries, that really emphasized the ability of human beings and their ability to reason. Now, philosophers like John Locke argued that man was born with certain natural rights, that all humans were born with certain natural rights that were inherently theirs and that should not and could not be taken away by rulers. He also emphasized this idea of social contract. And this social contract is going to be really, really, really important when we talk about the revolution in the next unit. The social contract emphasized this idea that there was this sort of tacit agreement between the ruler and the ruled. Citizens gave up some of their rights to do whatever they wanted and agreed to follow laws under the agreement, the understanding that the ruler would care for them. They would protect them from crime, and they would protect their property. They would protect their persons from war and criminals. And that was sort of the agreement, that the rulers were supposed to care for its subjects, and in return, the subjects would listen to the ruler. Locke and other philosophers actually argued that if this social contract was not upheld, then the citizens, the subjects, had a responsibility and obligation to choose a new ruler. And this is going to be really important when we get to the revolution. Now, these ideas in the Enlightenment also did have a tendency to undermine biblical wisdom. The idea that what is noble and what is good comes not from God or revelation, but through your senses, what you can see and hear and touch and taste and understand, the human mind. So this is going to a certain extent undermine some traditional religious ideas. And actually, that's going to lead us a little bit into the Great Awakening. So the Great Awakening was a religious revival of the 1730s and 40s. Now, increasingly in the 18th century, we're seeing, beginning of the 18th century, we've seen less religious zeal than we had seen in the early years of colonization in the 17th century with the Puritans, for example. Increasingly, people felt that these sermons were dry and boring and maybe depressing and didn't really have the ability to move them. So this was sort of a response to sort of decreasing membership and interest in Puritan churches, and also the threat of other doctrines. Some people were arguing you didn't need God's grace necessarily to be saved. You only needed a life of good works. So these were seen as dangerous theories and dangerous doctrines. So the Great Awakening really comes out of this, and to a certain extent out of German pietism. It emphasized the heart over the head in terms of spirituality. So Jonathan Edwards is really going to help kick this off. Jonathan Edwards was a preacher in New England, and he actually combined Enlightenment ideas with religious fervor. He was very intellectual and reasoned in his sermons, but he emphasized that, yes, we need God's grace, according to him. And he also really emphasized the danger of eternal hellfire. He gave these very fiery speeches saying that the only thing that was protecting human beings was God's decision to protect us. And he gave these very lurid sermons about what could happen if God chose not to care for us. His most famous sermon was called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Another really famous preacher of the Great Awakening was George Whitefield. Now, George Whitefield really does help to spread the Great Awakening like brush fire. He was an electrifying orator. He was just passionate and emotional. And according to one famous English actor at the time, he could make people weep with his pronunciation of the word Mesopotamia. So really, really had this emotive style of sermon. He preached on street corners and in fields. He was itinerant. He moved around. He could preach to crowds of hundreds or even thousands at these revival meetings. And they were marked by people converting, groaning, shrieking, rolling on the ground, rolling in the snow in this religious ecstasy. Now, there were some who disapproved of this. Older clergymen, sometimes referred to as old lights, criticized this emotionalism and this theatricality, and said that it was just against the ways and not appropriate. And then, of course, new lights were going to disagree with this. They're going to defend the Great Awakening as needed to revive religious fervor in the colonies, as it did. And it also led to the development of other denominations in the United States, or what later became the United States. Interestingly enough, the Great Awakening also really emphasized democratic tendencies in the Bible in opposition to the tyranny of like the wealthy colonial officials. So a couple other elements of the Great Awakening, some of these I've already touched on, obviously marked by a great deal of enthusiasm and itineracy. Traveling preachers that brought religion to the people. People didn't have to go to the church, religion came to them. It was a socially leveling force. It very much emphasized an individual and personal relationship with God, not necessarily something that had to be managed through a priest or a preacher, but a very personal relationship relationship. Now, the consequences of this were pretty far reaching. We'll talk a little bit about political and social in a minute in more detail, but it did foster a diversity of religious opinions, which also helped to foster a diversity in political thought. It was absolutely anti-hierarchical, an anti-elitist movement that criticized, again, corrupt colonial officials that were seen as working for the monarchs in Britain. And it led to new denominations. We see the birth of new religious groups that become very ingrained in American life, like the Baptists, the Methodists, the Episcopalians. So there's no one faith that had a monopoly in the British colonies. And indeed, this is what we see later on with the development of the new United States. Okay, so what are some of the social and political consequences of this change in American culture? And we've already mentioned a little bit, but just to recap, the Enlightenment really helped to awaken people to an awareness of their liberty and rights they felt inherently they should have as human beings. The Great Awakening helped to bind people together. It was the first American movement. It helped to unite them. It emphasized democracy. It emphasized these anti-hierarchical tendencies. So increasingly, we're going to start to see this division between the interests of European rulers, particularly the British, and settlers, colonial settlers. Increasingly, there were disagreements over territorial settlement, frontier defense, self-rule, and trade. And something that would definitely help to exacerbate this growing distance between the British rulers and the colonial settlers was this practice of impressment. Great Britain was embroiled in a great deal of war in the early 18th century, and he had a tendency to impress men to serve in the Royal Navy. This meant that basically, if you were a British man, and of course all colonial settlers, all the colonists living in the British colonies were considered to be British, you could be forced to serve in the Royal Navy. You didn't have to volunteer. They could just grab you off a ship or grab you off a shore and say, hey, you're in the Navy now. Congratulations. And they release you when they felt like it. So essentially, men could be forced, British subjects could be forced to serve in the British Navy for as long as they wanted them to serve. And this really infuriated people. In fact, King George's War in 1747, the practice of impressment caused riots for days. So this is really making a lot of people angry. So again, this division is really becoming increasingly apparent. British colonies, whether they were joint stock company colonies, royal colonies, proprietary colonies, either way, the ultimate power structure was not driven by colonists in spite of the presence of colonial ruling legislatures and assemblies. As colonies got bigger and bigger, the oversight of the colonies, it became more apparent how much money the colonies and power could really bring in to Britain. So oversight from Britain got more and more complex, and in colonists' eyes, it felt more intrusive as well. Colonists increasingly saw themselves as being used in this mercantilist system. And you recall, we talked about mercantilism in an earlier video as this system in which colonies are supposed to serve this purpose of enriching the mother country, like England. So they felt like they were being used. They were being held down by imperial structures. They felt they were pawns and victims in conflicts like King George's War and later on the French and Indian War, which we'll talk about in Unit 3. So they really felt like, what are we getting from England? They didn't feel like they were getting much, but they felt like they were definitely being used by England. Now, England saw it very differently. England saw itself as an organizing and strengthening the empire, that the colonies were just another part of Britain. And colonists should be just as happy as any other British subject or citizen to work to strengthen the empire. And they also felt that colonies benefited from that strength. So what you can see here is this very divergent worldview. Colonies saw things as being done to them, not for them. On the other hand, England saw colonies as valuable and expensive holdings. And they felt like the colonies should do something to pull their weight. They started to see increasingly by the middle of the 18th century that salutary neglect was an obsolete practice, that more and more of the colonies should be under oversight of the British ruler. Okay, so this is really helping to lead us up, if you have not guessed, into Unit 3, which is, of course, going to feature the lead up to and the actual act of the Revolutionary War and the development of the new United States. So we're going to talk about that in future videos.